the Stay Spicy podcast, where we are busting myths and bringing new perspectives on the topic of leadership. Today's episode is called The System Isn't Broken, but It Should Be. I used to say the system is broken, but I've changed my view on this. And, now I think the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was intended by the people who built it. And that is the problem. A quote was shared with me actually the other day that I think fits this really well on this topic. So Jessica Riddell included this quote by James Clear in her book, Hope Circuits. So James Clear says, "You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fail to the level of your systems." And that really resonated me. So what does this mean exactly? Well, I'm going to start off by telling a bit of a story. And as Sherry and our guest today know, I love this story. It's an old folktale called The Emperor's New Clothes. So for those who are not familiar with it, basically, there's this emperor who has an obsession with his image and specifically fancy new clothes, spends a lot of money on them. And then there's these two con men that come into town and convince the emperor that they make the most beautiful clothes. So the emperor hires these two con men to make clothes for him. But of course, they don't actually know how to make clothes. So they start making fake clothes and convince the emperor that only smart people can see the clothes, that stupid people and incompetent people cannot see the clothes. And so, of course, the emperor doesn't want to be seen as stupid or incompetent, so pretends to see these fake clothes, as does his officials and the servants, because they also don't want to be seen as stupid or incompetent. And so on the day that the emperor's clothes are finished, they pretend to dress him in these fake clothes. So he's essentially naked. And he proceeds to walk through the city to show all of his subjects his beautiful new clothes. So he walks naked through the city, and all the townsfolk go along with this because they also don't want to be caught out, and they just assume this ruse. And it's finally this one child that actually calls it out. And that says, essentially, he's naked. Dude, your dick is out. So I love this story, not just because I identify with the child, but because a little while ago, it struck me as very similar to a lot of situations I'd been in the workplace. And almost like there was these roles or these archetypes that everybody plays, and this system kept perpetuating itself, repeating itself over and over again, which struck me as crazy because this is a folktale from 1837. And here we are in 2024, still going through these same systems. So that is what we want to talk about today. We have a guest today who specializes in changing or breaking antiquated systems. I guess in that story I just told, maybe she's the role of the child. And Sherry's going to actually introduce our guest.
Oh boy, this is going to be a spicy one. I think this is a great kind of culmination of all the conversations we've been having on the podcast, because you can talk about bosses and coworkers and all of the things, but all of those things are included in systems. So I am thrilled to be joined by Jen Kluthe. And, Jen brings a ton of practical experience helping CEOs and leaders rethink systems and rethink their companies. So she's big on challenging outdated cookie cutter approaches to building organizations. And Jen, you believe that every company's structure should be as unique as the services that it provides. And I love that because, brand is so much more than a logo. It's like your whole workplace, your system, everything that you're building. So you have a knack for making the invisible visible. Jen jokes that her sixth sense is seeing company systems kind of like Haley Joel Osment sees dead people, which I think
in the movie Sixth Sense.
It's
not
hilarious.
in day-to-day life, I'm sorry.
No, I hope not. So, the invisible structures that guide our work, Jen, you see them. So you help, people ask those questions. How's that working for you? How are these systems working for you? And, who says you have to do things a certain way, which I love. I love this innovative thinking. We talk about innovation, but it's hard, right? You can instantly spot when a so-called best practice, no matter how prestigious the agency, is just this, shiny wrapped up object. And I love when you say things like zombie recommendations, because while they may seem appealing, they're only going to eat away at your culture and happiness. So they have no soul, like zombies. So, it's an uncomfortable place for a lot of people to go. It's an uncomfortable place for a lot of leaders to go, a lot of staff to go. But we can't unsee the obvious, and we do have a choice to bring it around. So welcome, Jen, to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Sherry, and thank you, Lynette. Like, what a great conversation that we're having today, and if only we could remember all the time how the fable of the emperor's news clothes. We laugh at the emperor. We chide at the two folks who were there, duping the emperor and the kingdom. And
Right.
we all think that we're the child. But in any given system at any given time, we're playing all of those roles.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's so fun about this work and this conversation is how can we see the system because we feel it? And then how can we be in a position to make some choice around it in a practical way?
Amazing. Yeah. So, you kicked us off, but let's start by talking about what actually is the system.
So we as humans are brilliant creatures when we are in a group. And the way that we can organize ourselves is we create a system. It's a shared way of acting, it's a shared set of beliefs, and it's a way to organize ourselves in order to create some sort of way to collaborate or to just sort of function. So a school is a system, a bank is a system, a family is a system. That's a different whole other conversation.
Different
And
podcast.
really, and work, of course, is a system, which is there's agreements that are in there that we may or may not have explicitly said, I'm going to agree to act in it. But because we don't want to stand out, like we're on the Serengeti and get so what's interesting about a system is that we will act in it as a way to self-preserve. And what's interesting about this work of the work is to say, where do we want to make a choice on which role we want to play? And I focus my work on the system of work, because when we can see it from the outside and when we can see who's playing the roles of emperor, child, the dupers, or the townspeople, we can set a choice to do something different.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's systems that we don't think about being systems. I mean, you talked about family systems. You've talked briefly previously about, the beauty industry and things like that. Do you have any examples of how maybe you yourself or people you have participated in a system and without realizing it, maybe? Because you talked about that sort of those shared beliefs that create habits, and we don't necessarily think about them until we're forced to.
I had an interesting realization. I'm the mother of two teenage girls, and I was reflecting on back because I was asked the question. It was some sort of icebreaker moment around like, what was your most embarrassing moment? And I didn't answer it this way, funny enough, but in my mind, I went to this point of my most embarrassing moment when I was swished back to high school. And in high school, there was always the place where, people had to converge and move through, and everybody's in their groups. And so me just wanting to get through where the convergent in this hallway was where like the cool people were and the jockey people were. And I'm walking through the middle of it, and someone had left a Tampax in the middle of the floor, and I ended up stepping on it inadvertently. And so I'm walking through the rest of this cool people's place with a Tampax on the bottom of my feet. And it was the most embarrassing moment. Now, why was it the most embarrassing moment? Number one, well, we as teenagers aren't supposed to menstruate, heaven forbid. You're not supposed to certainly have any sort of display that you have any product around this. In fact, there was this huge campaign about the microfilm and it being so discreet. So I poured forward a few years, and I'm teenage, I've got my teenage daughters, and I'm preparing her for, what's it like to be a menstruating woman. And I'm like, okay, here's what you do with the product. You put it here, you put it in your pocket. You can just, you do this with it. It goes over here. And here's how you can get through your day without anybody knowing that you have your period. And she's puzzled, and she looks at me and she says, Mom, why are we hiding it? And I went, oh, right. you just take that tampon and you put it on the top of your head and you wheel it around and you go across. You're like, I'm going to the bathroom because I'm going to change my tampon. But that was a realization for me in the system, is that I'm perpetuating the belief that, being a woman means shame, and hiding a very natural part of our lives is the fact that this is something you are supposed to hide. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're not supposed to be you. So I
I
was
hadn't thought
participating
about
in
it.
that.
I hadn't thought about it until you just said it. But I remember, being at work, and I would always wear dresses that didn't have, like, clothing that didn't have pockets. And so when I'd have to go, I'd tuck it in my sleeve like a ninja. I'd be like, so that nobody would see me carrying a tampon. Like, it matters. But yes, that is a system, a shared belief.
System and a
Until we
shared
change
belief.
it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so
Until we change it. So
until we change it. But until I saw it, in this instance, going back to the fable, Adina raised her hand and said, Mom, you got no clothes on here, in the sense of, I'm telling you what you cannot see. You are perpetuating a myth. And it was like, oh, okay. Thanks for the learning.
So that's a great segue to, okay, so if we see first, how do we change the systems? I guess you said first we have to see them. And how do we change these beliefs and behaviors in general?
Yeah, my journey to being someone who is in an organization all the time, and working at actually fairly senior levels, to being someone who works outside and with, even something that's different is working in this way of being fractional. I'm a soul wizard, and I go in and I work in organizations, just not full time, but I work with them to see some of those areas where they can make change. And what are those areas? Is if we hear things like, we have an annual budget cycle. That is a myth. We need to show up and do the work that's on our job description. That is also a myth. We find that we are in meetings all day long and we're not getting anything done. Meetings are also a myth. We are finding in organizations that, we're fatigued and that we need to hire more people because we have a productivity issue. All of those things, which I see in every organization, are symptoms of the setup and the design. And they are actually all myths. And so how do we unpack them? And that is the work that I do with people.
This is wild. It's like questioning the things that have existed since the Industrial Revolution.
Questioning everything.
Yeah, really though. So how do you work with clients to break those walls? So I know this is probably a very vulnerable conversation, uncomfortable conversation for many clients. How have you changed cultures with some of your clients? And maybe give us some examples of how that looks.
I say I work in the area of epiphany. And an epiphany is something that once you have it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
So the epiphany here is, we'll take meetings culture. It's phenomenal that we all have control actually around this thing of how we meet and where we meet. And yet time and time again, we will, go through the day exhausted, having meeting, and then do our real work either before and after, air quotes, when work is. Mm-hmm. And so a truism is we generally don't tell the truth to people the higher up in the organization we go. So the leader, genuine, says, how was this meeting? Or how was this thing? Can you, give me some feedback? And the proclivity to say, that was great, that was fabulous, to group norm around it is really high. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we'll do, and whatever the thing is if we're noticing a pain point, is create a way to provide feedback by breaking that power structure. This is not a blame game on the CEO or the job title person. This is just the fact that it's awkward to give truth when it can be risky. After all, you hold my job, you hold my paycheck. Mm-hmm. And then once we see it, we start to digest and make some very practical changes to the thing or the rhythm that we are in. So we're really busy at work doing the thing we want to do. We want to produce stuff. We want to sell stuff. We want to, go into new areas. We're trying to innovate. And that's like 90% of our day. The work that I do with the group is how do we see the rest of it on how we're working to make some practical changes and tweaks. So my work is the work of work, and I do that in companies. Was that a practical enough example around meetings? Because I can also provide some other examples as well around how this thing that seems kind of ethereal, with some surgical tweaks, you can make a big difference in your joy.
Yeah, I'm really curious about other sort of systems and myths that you've gone into companies and said you don't need to do that anymore, and more importantly, I think, what did that change into, I guess, or did you just remove it? Because I'm thinking, okay, so if you eliminated meetings, how, like, did you just take the meetings out and everybody was great, or was there sort of something else that was put in its place for whatever the purpose was?
We've heard of, or you might probably know of, Marie Kondo.
Yes.
And Marie Kondo takes a look at your closet and your things and holds up the thing and says, do you love it? If you do, we keep it. If we don't, away you go. Mm-hmm. That design principle holds up for meetings, which is, if you were to empty the schedule of meetings, which actually some organizations have done, it doesn't mean don't meet. It says every once in a while you need to clean the closet. You need to take all this stuff out and only put back in what's been essential. And it's very interesting around those choices of, did we really need to have this conversation? That's the first. And if we were to say, take out 50%, you only get like dollars, you only get to spend this amount of time in meetings, the values around that time changes. So first we empty the closet, then we put in the essential items. And then the next thing is anything that says regularly scheduled and is scheduled by job title, pretty good indication that it's maybe not the best time being had by all. So what's the outcome? And then why should I be showing up? And then how do I have the right agenda? So it's just a different way of taking a look at, senior leader meeting every Friday morning. We're going to have the same conversation and we're going to generally hate it. Instead, we can take the thing out. We're laughing because this is sometimes things are funny because they're true, and sometimes they're funny because they're not true. This is funny because it's true.
Yeah. Does not spark joy.
Does not spark joy. And so that is one example where it sounds like, right, but we're all in control of how we meet and who we meet with, wherever we are. And yet we're having this collectively shitty experience, and we just keep going because we're busy, and it is work to make change. So some of those surgical things, we've seen productivity expand and people are actually be able to do work.
That's amazing. And as a consultant, this kind of relates to me because I realized that when I started working with companies and started, kind of joining their teams in a way, because I do a lot of writing and stuff like that, I got to pick and choose the meetings I went to. And every single meeting that was like based on a group, like a specific job title or like marketing meeting or something like that, like regular scheduled, I found myself pulling out of all of them because A, I didn't have to because I wasn't technically an employee, and B, it freed up more time for me to do the work. So if I wasn't in a meeting that was on a specific project, I kind of let it go. And it was insane how much I could get done and how much time I had to just crunch out the projects and get the stuff done. So looking at it from the outside, I think, is an advantage, and obviously one that you have, Jen, to see that. So that's really fascinating. I'm starting to light bulbs are going off over here on these little truisms.
And not just whether you meet, but I think you talked about how you meet. Right. One thing I hated most, certain kinds of meetings, was just activity updates. I had a boss that loved those, and everyone in the organization hated that meeting and expressed it to the boss and said, can we please stop doing these meetings, or can we change the way they're done? And so the entire organization had to go around and give essentially like an activity update. And then it created this culture of feeling like you needed to prove you were busy. And so I committed to myself that I would never do those kinds of meetings, that if we did team meetings, that it would be focused on brain sprouting or strategy or something useful, not just report to me what you've been up to. So it's also questioning, how are we structuring this meeting, and what are people going to get out of it, and more than just the leader needs to get something out of the meeting.
And we're seeing now a real, and you talk about leadership, but it's a bit of an existential crisis around leadership because the way the organization was designed, the role of the leader was to do all of the thinking, and the role of the anybody who's not as leaders to do all the doing. And before, in order for the leader to do all the thinking, I need information from direct reports. And in this age, we do not need information from direct reports as any longer. So there's a bit of an existential crisis around what's your purpose. And so we're very much seeing a flattening that happens where it's a hub and spoke model, where we, instead of having the tree structure, so instead of having the pyramid structure, which is actually a replication of a kingdom, that's another topic, we're actually seeing hub and spoke, which is better reflection of the work. So a really not so cool, but I find fun party trick is if you show me your org structure, I will tell you your culture, because that structure is exactly how we act and how we operate.
Oh, I really want to do that.
It's like tarot card reading for the organizational design nerds.
So Lynette's bread and butter.
We're going to have to bring you back for another episode, and I'm just going to get org structures from different, actually I could get 5 different org structures from the same organization all within 2 years to show you.
Also an indication. So those are some changes around what's the role of leader. And if I'm held accountable to report up, I will do what I get paid for. And so those are some tweaks, which is comes back to what is the role of the leader in this? Is this leader as coach? Is this leader as director? But it is a different meaning around self-managed teams. And we're seeing lots of instances, more in Europe because their org design is a little more ahead of us. So I'm able to collaborate and bring some stories back with very practical organizations who have gotten rid of and are using this very crazy, scary term of self-management, and they are doing just fine.
I love it. So you've talked about, challenging the concept of org structures. You've talked about job descriptions as well. And even, I think at one point I heard you talk about job interviews. And so what's something that you've seen, or what, I guess maybe what's your biggest bugaboo about, and after this, Sherry and I are going to throw ours at you and see what you think of them. But I want to hear yours first, Jen, about if you had to pick one of our, traditional workplace structures and company structures that just you think is the most absurd or most useless, what would it be?
Would be titles and job descriptions. Because the belief system is I'm only here to work within the confines of my job description. The belief is the job description is this t-shirt. It's this identity that I put on people, and you can only move within what your t-shirt says. And so what it does in the organization, it says is I can't show up to do the job that needs to be done. I'm not incentivized for that. I'm only here to show up to do the job on my JD, on my job description. And so that rewiring of how I can see the problem, Sherry, you talked about, you can see because you're not in the confines of the system. You can maneuver to see the job that needs to be done and select where you're most productive as an outsider. But for insiders, it really is stick within your confines. So again, nothing is practical when you just whisk it away. We put in other very practical ways of saying, so how do I know what I should work on? But we trust. You've heard of theory X and theory Y. Theory X is we don't trust folks to do what they need to do, so they need to be in the office all the time so I can watch you. Theory Y is a more human-centered approach that says that you are a thinking, sentient human and you're going to make some mistakes, but I can trust that you know where to put your butt every day for work. Formed opinion on that. And so, when we kind of use some of those trust examples, somehow, why is it that me as a human, I can leave work and somehow function, but when I come into work, I need to be told what to do. And at one instance, tape my receipts onto a sheet of paper to prove that I didn't steal $6 worth of coffee. So you can sort of see how those systems, when we question them and go, why are you doing that? Who wins? Some of those easy tweaks just unlock a whole other way of being at work.
And I find that those systems aren't actually catching the people who are doing the bad things. It's creating work for the people who aren't, and then it's not actually focused on the people that are making the bad decisions.
So the old comic or the skit with Lucy and the assembly line with the chocolates? And the chocolates are running by, and the chocolates are going faster and faster and faster. And her solution to that, because her job is to make sure that the chocolates are sorted or wherever they are, is to like pop them in her mouth. It's because the way that, and it's funny because the way that our work is set up is it's based on assembly line productivity where I can see stuff. And that's the redesign opportunity, which is we're a knowledge work. We actually don't see most of the stuff of what we do and think about and digitize. So we're using old systems of hours and assembly line, and we need to reinvent work.
And we've talked about in past episodes this notion of some leaders not being able to lead without seeing their people physically in the office. I think that is what makes me think of that, right? Is that I need to see my people around me in order to feel like a leader and be a leader. And so whether it's right for your learning style or your work style or not, you must be here. And we're seeing a lot of that now, kind of post-COVID.
And my empathy for that is that's the only way I know. And my identity is another piece, is tied up to, making sure that I am overseeing. And it's a really big identity shift to say, maybe I need to go back to craft in order to add value, not in overseeing and supervising to add value. So that's a big shift for folks, but they may not see that that's the loop they're in.
So I want to throw a couple of workplace things at you, and you can tell us if you think they're a myth, and how could somebody rethink that? Or how would we go about rethinking that? Sherry, do you want to start with one of your workplace issues?
Yes, this one's broad, but
it's like work therapy.
Yeah. I do have two that drive me crazy. One of them is process. So we see companies that are really into process, very stringent processes. Personally, for me, as someone who has to do things quickly, sometimes processes trip me up. We don't do the best job we could. We don't put out the coolest product we could put out. That could be anything from RFP processes to the way that work is assigned. I've seen so many times just built for function. It's not built for the function. It's just built for the process. What do you think about processes, Jen, when you're working with clients? How do you kind of question them?
Well, the bureaucracy, which is process, is the antithesis braces of creativity. And so that is the art form, which is when we're small, we can lead by standing on a chair. But once we get to like 150 to 200 people, we need to put into some sort of process or steps to make sure that we're not repeating ourselves. What happens is we forget to Marie Kondo the old stuff and put in the new stuff, which is relevant today. So our iPhones or the phone gets reinvented all the time. But what we don't do is stop, because it takes time and we're busy and we're ferreting away, and I get it. But we forget to redo this thing and actually, and instead of adding on it. So I wonder, my question for you is, in this instance, this has been, we're going to make this better by adding on it, as opposed to we can make this better by starting from scratch.
Got it.
Yeah, clear the decks and start over. I have so many. I can't choose. I was just going to say HR, but I think I have to be more specific than that. I'll bring up one from a previous episode that we took issue with, because I want to get Jen's take on it, and that is exit interviews. Right.
So the statement of, someone who holds power, my proclivity to tell them the truth is pretty low. We get taught that right from schooling, the teacher's at the center of the room, or whatever that is. So an exit interview is really interesting that, we've waited to the end to find out what it is. And usually what happens, being behind the curtain in the HR function, is a couple of things. Number one, we either don't have time to get the information. Number two, we get the information, but we can't do anything with it because it needs to be confidential. Or number three, we use the information to go on a witch hunt. None of which, by the time the person has left, has actually helped with any of the systemic issues as to why the person may have left, if it's an internal thing. Mm-hmm. So then the question becomes, why are we doing them, and who's benefiting?
Yes. And I don't know if the solution is just not do them, but there's got to be some other thing you can do before somebody leaves to seek out information from them. or make it okay for them to, like you said, to say something to the boss. Jerry, do you have another one?
Strategy. Building strategies
Oh,
for
Jen got excited
every
about that
single. What's the strategy? And it's not perfect, so I have to throw out. Oh well, is that part of the strategy? What's the big strategy? We need a strategy. I don't know. I find strategy. I tell young communications folks that are going into corporate jobs to be careful of people who use that word a lot. And like it is in the corporate psyche and in the communication psyche. Like we use it a lot. So, what are your thoughts on that? The overuse of strategy or the lack thereof of strategy. Interested in your thoughts on that one, Jen.
Well, I think number one is the word strategy is a power word. If you want someone to go to your workshop, if you put the word strategic in front of it, more people will go. And so it can be one of those words that gets used because I'm actually not feeling I'm being heard. And so it's interesting to get curious as to why the word is tossed out a lot. The other thing is if you have someone external that needs to come in and go to an offsite so that you can talk about the things which are most important on an annual cycle, there's a lot of belief systems in there that number one, an external person's going to come save you. Two, that strategy follows any sort of annual cycle. And three, that the document from the top down has meant that the rest of the organization therefore doesn't know how to think. So it's a really interesting pinnacle of a bunch of beliefs in a system and where you can see it go wrong. Sherry, why does it bug you so much?
I like a good strategy. Like I think something that comes together and guides folks and it's high level and everyone can look at it and be like, yeah, we knocked that off. Like we're all on the same page. I don't like it when I find people hold up things because they keep saying, I find strategy disguised as perfectionism. So I've worked with leaders who they'll say, well, we need a strategy around this. Okay, fine. We need to execute this in 2 months. We need a strategy around. Okay, we develop a strategy. It's like 1 or 2 pages, whatever. They take it back. It doesn't get approved. It's back and forth. It's bantered around. Everyone's editing it. Nothing's getting done. So I find that, and sometimes it's taken as and used as, well, the strategy's not ready, so we can't go forward. And it's almost used as this like bastion of fear, like this thing you can use now to say, we're not ready to go. The strategy's not ready. What's the strategy? Every time someone brings an idea that people are afraid of and might, be a little bit risque. So I find it's used a bit too much. And there's all these high level strategy jobs. There's strategy firms. I see it everywhere. And I think, I used to have a sign on my desk that said, my strategy's getting shit done. I do believe there's a time and a place for strategic thought. And I love that from senior leaders, but I do think it's overused and sometimes it's used as a way to block something innovative from happening.
Yeah. And how I'm listening through that is there's a lot of the dynamics around using strategy is the reason to not do the thing we need to do. And it's actually the same thought dynamic, which is here's the reason I'm not working out. Here's the reason I'm not writing my book. Here's the reason I'm not fill in the blank. And so there's layers, Sherry, to what you described. But when we get into sometimes I can't do this until this other thing is done, actually what we are seeing here is a healthy amount of procrastination, and sometimes for good reason. And so what's interesting then there is we can actually act our way into wanting to do something. The best way to work out or wanting to work out, we're never going to want to work out. We just need to work out. And so I find it fascinating to take a look at the dynamics around using and holding up something as a reason to not do it. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that's what's going on in there, which is I'm afraid to fail. So here's a good reason for me to not start.
Because I have seen organizations where there wasn't a strategy or a common vision and everybody was confused about what are we here to do.
For sure.
And so I do think strategy is required to act as sort of a coalescing factor. But if every time you go to do, that should be enough, right? That's strategy. And then now you go and you execute. If every time you go to do something, you're like, we need a new strategy, that's, I think, an indicator of indecisiveness or like you said, procrastination.
In that instance. And then the upper layer, and very much agree, which is we need to know which mountain we're climbing to the top of. We can't see it very clearly, but and we shouldn't be changing mountaintops a lot. But how we get there is the discussion around really what is the strategy around those particular, what's the path that we're going to take. The more people who are involved and can touch that document and keep it alive, the better. So I love, back Sherry, to your idea around process, which is what is the way that we create strategy is also an indication of the culture that we have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one last one. What do you think of performance reviews?
That's a good one. That was my next one. Yeah, totally.
I'm trying to figure out who wins with performance management, actually. And that's an earnest question.
Oh, yeah, maybe I should have switched it to not performance reviews, but also like performance improvement plans. Those are just like, that's just a formality on the way to firing someone.
Performance improvement plans are a challenge because once the leader has decided that this person's not going to succeed, they just won't. There really is not a lot of hoops that will happen. The brain will put you in that box. I've not seen anybody turn that around. What is really interesting about 9-box systems, performance systems, succession systems is they are a way to take a complex series of decisions and put them into a complicated process. What do I mean by that? Anything that we're doing that involves humans is a series of discussions, and it is super contextual. Anytime you hear about boxes and forms, we're just trying to make it easy, not effective. And that's my polite way of traditional HR, why it feels so like it just isn't working for me. It's because this is a complex instance, and you're putting it into a boxed process because we brought an ERP system and we better make sure we're working it.
Mm-hmm. So
what do we do? So that's great. We can see what the problem. So in some of those things, it isn't about take it out, but it's about saying, what's the quality of the conversation that's going on? And how can we give the individual more power to ask for what they need? If we can solve those two things in a practical way by having a better meeting, chances are you're going to unlock the fact that I know what I'm doing and I know how I'm doing it well.
Mm-hmm. So before we wrap out, I could honestly talk about this all day. I have a whole list of these things. But what I want, so you work with companies where the CEO has at least agreed to have you come in and help them see things, right? So there's a willingness there. What if you are not the CEO and you're in a company and you see the system and you want to make change, or you want to choose a different role, as you said, in the system? What would you advise somebody in that position to do if they wanted to start questioning the systems that they're participating in and that are around them, but also start changing the roles that they play?
Love it. We've all seen Ted Lasso, or if you've seen Ted Lasso, there's a scene in Ted Lasso where, Jamie Tart, who's a soccer player, for those who haven't seen it, goes up to the board and he has an epiphany. And by the way, Ted Lasso is just about workplace design for us workplace design nerds. And Jamie Tart goes up to the board. It's the board that has the play. And he's saying, what I need you to do is I need you to go through me and not to me to the ball. And he realized that his job is not to play a set player, that his job on the players or the whole team is to play the field, not play their position. It was an entirely different way of looking at the game. So how do I make that practical? One of the questions you can ask yourself is, what is the job that needs to be done right now, as opposed to the job that's on my job description? And what's that suggestion I can add and be the little kid with the emperor's new clothes to bring things forward? The second piece that I always do, because I've learned this through myself as an achievement junkie, is to find my capacity. Where can I dial it back by 20%? Because I'll tell you, no one else is going to notice. And why that's relevant is, in my attempt to consistently get an A every single day, I've actually made it so that I'm not the best Jen. And so that provide capacity for myself and really look at my identity around this role are two interesting starting points to make change in the system. But also the only thing I can change is myself.
And you've
Did
talked
that
about,
make sense in terms of the stories around seeing the play and then also making sure I've got capacity to like play the play?
yeah. But also,
Definitely.
I want to ask you to invite you to talk about choice and consequence too, right? Because, we talk about being the child or, dialing back and all of the choices we make have consequences, some good, some bad. And there's sacrifice associated with change, right? Because if you do call out a system, sometimes the person in charge isn't going to like it. Or if you decide to make change, and that ruffles feathers, that there is a legitimate sacrifice or consequence associated with it. But it's still a choice.
It is still a choice. And changing a system manifests itself all the way from starting a war, no kidding, to the way that we fight things. If we are Gandhi with passive resistance, that's a way to change systems. The other way to change systems is to say, do I have enough privilege to be able to put my hand up and take a risk? And in that privilege, do I also offer a suggestion? Now, in the organizational setting, we've worked with leaders, we work with CEOs. I haven't met many that actually were like not wanting feedback. They may or may not do anything with it, but it isn't diabolical around look at the minions. We want to just look at you in your chairs. They actually know that they're getting filtered feedback all the time. So take that risk. I think we'd be surprised at what we can do with it.
Great.
Well, that was a very eye-opening discussion. Fascinating. So Jen, if our listeners want to connect with you or learn more about the work that you do, where can they find you?
Oh, I'd love to geek out or nerd out with someone and so please find me on LinkedIn at Jen Kluthe. I am very, very simple in finding me. And I hope to live what I preach for others, which is that states the story around, I'm sorry I wrote you such a long note. I didn't take the time to write you a short one. And in the work that I do, we take the time to make it simple and short.
I love that. Thanks so much, Jen, for today's conversation. We may end up inviting you back to analyze org charts because that just sounds really exciting for me. That's a wrap for this episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in. You can also find us on LinkedIn at Stay Spicy Inc.
Stay spicy, everyone. See you next time.